The November wind cut through the Nebraska prairie like a blade, and Beatrice Thompson's fingers had gone numb an hour ago, clutching the threadbare wool blanket that represented everything she owned in this world. She had been walking since dawn, having left the stage-coach station in Kearney after discovering she didn't have enough money for passage west, and now the sun was dropping fast behind the horizon, taking whatever meager warmth the day had offered with it. Her shoes, already worn thin from months of travel, had developed holes that let the cold seep through to her feet with every step, and she knew with a certainty that felt like stones in her stomach that she wouldn't survive the night out here in the open. The year was 1878, and Beatrice had learned the hard way that the frontier didn't care about the misfortunes that had brought a 22-year-old woman alone to Nebraska with nothing but the clothes on her back and a blanket that had seen better days. She had left Ohio 3 months ago after her father's farm had been seized by the bank, after her mother had died the previous winter, after every door in her small town had closed to her one by one. There had been talk of an aunt in California, a woman she had never met who might take her in, but now that seemed like a foolish dream she had chased all the way to the middle of nowhere. Her legs trembled as she forced herself to take another step, then another. The prairie stretched endlessly in every direction, brown grass rippling in waves under the relentless wind. She could see nothing that resembled shelter, no trees, no buildings, just the vast emptiness that made her feel smaller than she had ever felt in her life. Her breath came out in white clouds, and she pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, knowing it was useless but unable to stop herself from trying. When her knees finally buckled, she didn't try to catch herself. She simply folded down into the dead grass, tucking her body into the smallest shape she could manage, wrapping the blanket around herself completely. The cold bit through immediately, but at least she wasn't fighting it anymore. At least she could rest. Her eyes burned with tears that she refused to let fall because crying would only make her colder, would only waste energy she didn't have to spare. She didn't hear the horse approaching until it was nearly upon her. The sound of hoofbeats made her lift her head, squinting against the fading light. A rider was coming from the east, sitting tall in the saddle on a dark bay horse that moved with easy confidence across the rough terrain. For a moment, Beatrice felt a spike of fear because she had heard stories about what could happen to women alone on the frontier. But then she realized that fear required energy she simply didn't possess. Whatever was going to happen would happen, and she was too cold and too tired to do anything about it. The rider pulled up short when he spotted her, and she heard him make a sound of surprise. He swung down from the saddle with practiced ease, his boots hitting the ground with a solid thud. As he approached, she could make out more details through her blurred vision. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a weathered face that put him somewhere in his mid-20s. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy, denim pants, a heavy canvas coat, worn leather boots, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his features. "Madam." His voice was deep and carried genuine concern. "What in God's name are you doing out here?" Beatrice tried to answer, but her teeth were chattering so hard she couldn't form words. She clutched her blanket tighter, the only response she could manage. The cowboy dropped to one knee beside her, and she saw his eyes widen as he took in her condition. They were blue, she noticed distantly, the color of a summer sky, though she couldn't remember what summer felt like anymore. "You're half frozen," he said, and there was something in his tone that made it clear he understood the seriousness of her situation. "We need to get you warm. Can you stand?" She shook her head slightly. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else, distant and unresponsive. "All right," he said, and she heard him moving with swift purpose. "I am going to build you a fire. Just hold on." Beatrice watched through half-closed eyes as he worked. His name was Vincent Vale, though she didn't know that yet, and he had spent the last 7 years working cattle across Nebraska and Kansas, learning to read weather and land, and the signs that meant the difference between life and death in this unforgiving country. He recognized immediately that the woman huddled in front of him was in serious danger, and he moved with the kind of focused urgency that came from understanding exactly how little time they had. There wasn't much in the way of fuel out here on the open prairie, but Vincent had learned how to make do with what was available. He gathered dried grass in great armfuls, pulled buffalo chips from the areas where the herds had passed through, and used his knife to cut strips of bark from his saddle bags where he kept emergency supplies. He worked quickly, efficiently, his hands steady despite the cold that had to be affecting him too. Within minutes, he had built a small fire pit, using stones from his saddle bags to create a windbreak. He struck flint to steel, caught a spark in a nest of the driest grass, and nursed it carefully until flames began to lick upward. The fire was small at first, tentative, but he fed it steadily until it grew strong enough to push back against the encroaching darkness and cold. "Come closer," Vincent said, reaching for Beatrice. His hands were gentle but firm as he helped her move nearer to the flames. She could feel the heat now, a blessing so profound it made her want to weep. He positioned her carefully, making sure she was close enough to benefit from the warmth, but not so close she might accidentally catch her blanket on fire. But even with the fire burning, Vincent could see she was still shaking violently. The single blanket she clutched wasn't nearly enough, and the heat would take time to work its way through her frozen body. He didn't hesitate. Without a word, he shrugged out of his heavy coat and draped it over her shoulders on top of her blanket. "No," Beatrice managed to stammer through her chattering teeth. "You will freeze." "I have been cold before," Vincent said simply. "You need it more than I do right now." The coat was heavy and lined with wool, and it still carried the warmth of his body. Beatrice felt it settle over her like a blessing, and she couldn't find the strength to protest further. She burrowed into the added warmth, pulling both the coat and her blanket tight around herself. Vincent settled on the other side of the fire, feeding it steadily to keep the flames high. Now that she was situated, he allowed himself to study her more carefully. Even in her current state, cold and exhausted and frightened, he could see she was beautiful. Her hair was dark brown, almost black, and hung in tangled waves around her face. Her eyes were large and expressive, a warm brown that reminded him of polished walnut. Her features were delicate, but there was something in the set of her jaw that spoke of strength, of someone who had endured more than she should have had to. "What is your name?" he asked after a few minutes, his tone gentle. "Beatrice," she whispered. "Beatrice Thompson. Vincent Vale," he replied. "Most people call me Vince. Can you tell me what happened? How did you end up out here alone?" The story came out in halting fragments. She told him about Ohio, about losing her parents and the farm, about the journey west that had taken everything she had. She explained about Kearney, about discovering she didn't have enough money to continue, about deciding to walk because she had nowhere else to go and winter was coming, and she had run out of options. Vincent listened without interrupting, his expression growing more troubled with each detail. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire, the flames reflected in his eyes, dancing shadows across his face. "That was a brave thing you did," he finally said, "leaving everything you knew to try to make a new start." "Foolish, maybe, walking out onto the prairie without supplies, but brave." "I do not feel brave," Beatrice said quietly. "I feel like an idiot who nearly got herself killed." "The two are not mutually exclusive," Vincent replied, and there was a hint of something that might have been humor in his voice. "But you are not dead yet, and I intend to make sure you stay that way." He reached into his saddle bags and pulled out strips of dried beef and a canteen of water. He handed them to Beatrice, watching as she took small, careful bites. "Not too fast," he cautioned. "Your stomach needs to adjust." The food and water helped, giving her strength she desperately needed. The fire helped more, warming her from the outside in. But it was the coat, heavy and warm and smelling faintly of leather and horse and something uniquely masculine, that made the real difference. Slowly, incrementally, the violent shaking began to subside. "Where were you headed when you found me?" Beatrice asked after she had eaten. "Back to the ranch where I work," Vincent said. "The 7 Pines, about 6 miles south of Kearney. We have been moving cattle all week, and I was riding back to tell the boss we finished the count." He paused, studying her across the flames. "You can come with me if you want. The ranch house has room, and Mrs. Chen, who runs the kitchen, is always looking for help. She would probably take you on if you needed work." Beatrice stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You would do that for me? Take me in? You do not even know me." "I know you are alone and cold and need help," Vincent said with a shrug. "That is enough. Besides, out here we take care of each other. It is the only way anyone survives." Something in Beatrice's chest, something that had been frozen and hard for months, began to thaw. She looked at this man who had given her his coat without hesitation, who had built her a fire and shared his food, and was now offering her a lifeline when she had thought there were none left in the world. "Thank you," she whispered, and the words felt utterly inadequate for what she was feeling. "Do not thank me yet," Vincent said, but he was almost smiling. "Mrs. Chen works her kitchen help hard. You might wish you had kept walking." They stayed by the fire as full darkness fell, letting the flames push back the night. Vincent kept feeding the fire, maintaining a steady heat, and gradually Beatrice felt life returning to her frozen limbs. Her fingers and toes tingled painfully as sensation returned, but she welcomed even that discomfort because it meant she was warming up, that she was going to survive this. Vincent asked her questions as they sat there, gentle inquiries about her life in Ohio, about her family, about the journey west. Beatrice found herself answering more fully than she had intended, drawn out by his calm presence and genuine interest. He listened well, she realized, really listened, not just waiting for his turn to talk but actually paying attention to what she was saying. In turn, she asked about his life. He told her he was 26, that he had come west from Missouri when he was 19, running from a father who drank too much and hit too hard. He had worked a series of ranches, learning the cattle trade from the ground up, and had been with the 7 Pines for the last 3 years. He spoke matter-of-factly about the hard work and long hours, but there was something in his voice when he talked about the land, about the open prairie and the big sky, that suggested he had found something out here he hadn't known he was looking for. "You ever think about going back?" Beatrice asked. "To Missouri? No," Vincent said simply. "There is nothing for me there. This is home now." The certainty in his voice made Beatrice feel something she couldn't quite name. She had been running from loss, fleeing toward a vague hope of something better, but Vincent had run toward something specific, had found it and claimed it as his own. She wondered what it would feel like to have that kind of belonging, that sense of place. When the fire had burned low and Beatrice was warm enough to move without shaking, Vincent helped her to her feet. "We should head to the ranch," he said. "It is a few hours' ride, but we will get there before midnight if we leave now." "Your horse cannot carry both of us that far," Beatrice protested. "Duke is stronger than he looks," Vincent replied, patting the bay's neck affectionately. "And you do not weigh enough to make much difference. Come on." He helped her mount first, then swung up behind her with easy grace. Beatrice found herself pressed back against his chest, his arms coming around her to hold the reins. It was intimate and should have made her uncomfortable, but instead she felt safe, protected. When he urged Duke into a steady walk, she let herself lean into his warmth, grateful beyond words. The ride across the dark prairie should have been terrifying, but somehow it wasn't. Vincent guided Duke with confident ease, and the horse moved steadily through the darkness, as though he could see things his riders couldn't. The sky above was spectacular, stars scattered like diamonds across black velvet, the moon rising fat and bright to light their way. "It is beautiful," Beatrice whispered, tipping her head back to look at the stars. "It is," Vincent agreed, and something in his tone made her think he wasn't just talking about the sky. They talked as they rode, their voices low in the darkness. Vincent told her about the ranch, about the foreman named Jack Sterling who ran the operation with a fair but firm hand, about Mrs. Chen and her husband who managed the domestic side of things, about the other cowboys who worked the cattle. He painted a picture of a place that sounded rough but functional, a small community carved out of the wilderness through hard work and determination. Beatrice, in turn, found herself talking about things she hadn't spoken of in months. She talked about her mother, about the woman's gentle strength, and the way she had faced her final illness with dignity. She talked about her father, about his despair after his wife died, and how he had seemed to lose the will to fight when the bank came calling. She talked about the fear that had driven her west, the terror of ending up trapped in a life that felt like slow suffocation. "That will not happen here," Vincent said quietly. "Whatever else this country is, it is not suffocating. There is space to breathe, room to become whoever you want to be." His words settled into Beatrice's chest like a promise, and she found herself wanting desperately to believe him. The Seven Pines Ranch revealed itself gradually, a collection of dark buildings against the darker prairie. Vincent guided Duke toward the largest structure, a two-story ranch house with light showing in several windows despite the late hour. He dismounted first, then helped Beatrice down, steadying her when her stiff legs nearly buckled. The door opened before they reached it, and a small, sturdy woman appeared in the doorway, holding a lantern high. "Vincent Vale, is that you?" she called. "We were beginning to worry. Sorry, Mrs. Chen," Vincent replied. "I found someone who needed help." Mrs. Chen lowered the lantern, getting a better look at Beatrice. Her face, weathered and wise, registered immediate understanding. "Bring her inside," she said briskly. "She looks half dead from cold." The inside of the ranch house was warm and smelled like coffee and bread and wood smoke. Mrs. Chen bustled around, stoking the fire in the large stone fireplace and pulling blankets from a chest. Vincent's coat was still draped over Beatrice's shoulders, and he made no move to take it back. "What is your name, girl?" Mrs. Chen asked, her tone gentler than her words. "Beatrice Thompson, madam," Beatrice replied. "Well, Beatrice Thompson, you look like you have had quite the journey. When did you last have a proper meal?" Beatrice had to think about it. 3 days ago, I think." "Maybe 4. Mrs. Chen made a tusking sound and disappeared into what was clearly the kitchen. Vincent guided Beatrice to a chair near the fireplace, making sure she was settled before stepping back. "Mrs. Chen will take good care of you," he said. "She is fierce about feeding people." "What about you?" Beatrice asked, suddenly reluctant to let him leave. This man had saved her life, and the thought of him disappearing into the night made her chest feel tight. "I need to take care of Duke and report to Sterling," Vincent said, "but I will be around. This is where I live." He held her gaze for a moment, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the strangeness and significance of their meeting. Then he touched the brim of his hat in a small gesture of farewell and headed back out into the night. Mrs. Chen returned with a bowl of thick stew and a chunk of bread that was still warm. "Eat slowly," she instructed, echoing Vincent's earlier words. "Your stomach needs to adjust." Beatrice ate carefully, each bite tasting better than anything she could remember. "Mrs. Chen settled into the chair across from her, watching with sharp dark eyes. "So," she said after a few minutes, "Vincent found you out on the prairie." "Yes, madam," Beatrice confirmed. "I was trying to walk to town and got caught by the cold. He built me a fire and gave me his coat." "That sounds like Vincent," Mrs. Chen said with a nod. "He has a good heart, that one. Been here 3 years and never once turned away from someone who needed help." She paused, studying Beatrice. "What were you doing walking alone on the prairie?" Beatrice explained again, the words coming easier this time. Mrs. Chen listened without judgment, nodding occasionally. When Beatrice finished, the older woman was quiet for a moment, then said, "Vincent mentioned I might have worked for you. He was right. I could use help in the kitchen and with the house. Pay is not much, but you get room and board and honest work." Interested, relief flooded through Beatrice so powerfully she felt dizzy. "Yes," she said. "Yes, madam, very much so." "Good," Mrs. Chen said decisively. "You can start after you have rested and recovered. For now, let's get you to bed. You look like you could sleep for a week." She led Beatrice upstairs to a small room under the eaves. It was simple, just a narrow bed and a chest of drawers, but to Beatrice it looked like paradise. Mrs. Chen provided a nightgown and left her alone to change. Beatrice climbed into the bed, pulling the quilts up to her chin, and thought about everything that had happened. This morning she had been preparing to die on the frozen prairie. Tonight she was warm and fed and safe, with the promise of work and shelter. And all of it because a cowboy with blue eyes and a kind heart had stopped to help her. She fell asleep with Vincent's coat still draped over the foot of her bed, a tangible reminder that good things could still happen in this harsh world. The next morning, Beatrice woke to sunlight streaming through a small window and the smell of coffee drifting up from downstairs. For a moment, she was disoriented, unable to remember where she was. Then the events of the previous night came flooding back, and she sat up quickly, looking around the small room with fresh eyes. Someone had brought her belongings up during the night. Her worn carpetbag, which she had dropped on the prairie and Vincent must have retrieved, sat on the chest of drawers. Her shoes, pathetic things with holes worn through the soles, had been placed neatly by the door. And Vincent's coat was still draped over the foot of her bed, a silent presence that made her heart do something complicated in her chest. She dressed quickly in her spare dress, which was only marginally less worn than the one she had been wearing yesterday. She would need new clothes eventually, but that would have to wait until she had earned some money. For now, she was just grateful to have something clean to wear. Downstairs, she found Mrs. Chen already hard at work in the kitchen, preparing what looked like breakfast for an army. "Good morning," the older woman said briskly. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in months," Beatrice admitted. "Thank you again for taking me in." "Thank Vincent," Mrs. Chen replied. "He is the one who brought you here. Now, since you are up, you can help. The men will be coming in for breakfast soon, and there is much to do." Beatrice threw herself into the work with gratitude, following Mrs. Chen's rapid-fire instructions. They fried eggs and bacon, made huge batches of biscuits, brewed pot after pot of strong coffee. The kitchen was warm and busy, and Beatrice found herself falling into the rhythm of it easily. She had helped her mother cook for years, and the familiar motions were comforting. The ranch hands began filtering in just as the sun cleared the horizon. They were a rough-looking bunch, weathered and work-hardened, but they treated Mrs. Chen with obvious respect and were polite to Beatrice. Once Mrs. Chen introduced her as the new kitchen help. She counted about 15 men in total, and they ate with the focused efficiency of people who worked hard physical jobs and needed the fuel. Vincent came in toward the end, and Beatrice felt her breath catch slightly when she saw him. In the daylight, she could appreciate details she had missed the night before. He was handsome, she realized in a rugged, unself-conscious way. His face was weathered from sun and wind, but his features were strong and even. When he spotted her, he smiled, a slow, warm expression that reached his blue eyes and made something flutter in her stomach. "Good morning, Miss Thompson," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "You look better than you did last night." "I feel better," Beatrice replied. "Thanks to you." "I never properly thanked you for what you did." "No need," Vincent said, but there was something in his eyes that suggested her words pleased him. "Are you settling in all right?" "Mrs. Chen has been wonderful," Beatrice said. "She has already put me to work." "That sounds like her," Vincent said with a chuckle. He poured himself a cup of coffee and accepted the plate of food Beatrice handed him. "If you need anything, just let me know. I am usually around somewhere." He settled at the long table with the other men, and Beatrice tried not to watch him too obviously, as she and Mrs. Chen cleaned up the kitchen. But she found her gaze drawn to him repeatedly, watching the easy way he interacted with the other cowboys, the quiet confidence in his movements. This was a man comfortable in his own skin, she realized, someone who knew who he was and what he was capable of. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Beatrice worked alongside Mrs. Chen, cooking and cleaning and learning the rhythms of ranch life. The work was hard, but it was honest and she was good at it. Mrs. Chen was a demanding teacher but a fair one, and Beatrice found herself gaining confidence as she mastered new skills. Vincent was around often, and Beatrice found herself looking forward to the times their paths crossed. He would stop by the kitchen for coffee, or she would see him working with the horses in the corral, or they would pass each other in the yard. He always had a smile for her, always took a moment to ask how she was doing, and gradually those brief exchanges grew longer, more substantial. One afternoon, about a week after her arrival, Beatrice was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when Vincent approached, leading Duke. "Afternoon, Miss Thompson," he said. "Beatrice, please," she replied. "Miss Thompson makes me feel like I am back in school." "Beatrice, then," he said, and her name sounded different in his deep voice, warmer somehow. "I was wondering if you might like to go for a ride. Duke here could use some exercise, and I thought you might enjoy seeing more of the ranch." Beatrice hesitated, glancing back at the house. "I should probably ask Mrs. Chen." "Already did," Vincent said with a grin. "She said you have been working yourself too hard and could use a break." That was surprising but welcome news. Beatrice found herself smiling back at him. "In that case, I would love to." Vincent helped her mount, then swung up behind her just as he had that first night. The closeness still affected her, making her hyper-aware of everywhere their bodies touched, but it was less frightening now and more thrilling. Vincent guided Duke away from the ranch buildings, heading out onto the open prairie. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, moving through the brown grass under a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. The land rolled gently, deceptively simple but full of subtle variations. Vincent pointed out landmarks, explaining the geography of the ranch with obvious pride. "That creek over there marks the eastern boundary," he said, gesturing toward a line of trees barely visible in the distance. "And that ridge to the south is where we usually find the cattle when they wander. They like the shelter it provides from the wind." "How big is the ranch?" Beatrice asked. "About 10,000 acres, Vincent replied. "Not huge by some standards, but enough to support a good-sized herd. Sterling runs about 2,000 head, give or take." "That sounds like a lot of cattle to keep track of," It can be, Vincent agreed. That is what we do most of the time, riding out to check on them, moving them to better grazing, keeping them away from trouble. It is good work, though. Honest. They crested a small rise and Vincent pulled Duke to a stop. From here they could see for miles in every direction, the prairie stretching endlessly toward the horizon. "This is why I stay," he said quietly. "This view, this feeling, out here I can breathe." Beatrice understood exactly what he meant. Despite all the hardship that had brought her here, despite the fear and loss and uncertainty, there was something about this land that called to something deep inside her. It was harsh, yes, but it was also beautiful in a way that was hard to articulate. It didn't pretend to be anything other than what it was. "I think I see why you love it," she said softly. Vincent was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was closer to her ear, intimate. "I am glad you ended up here, Beatrice. Glad I found you that night." "So am I," she whispered, and she meant it with her whole heart. They stayed there for a while longer, watching the wind move through the grass like waves on a golden ocean. Then Vincent turned Duke back toward the ranch, and they rode slowly, neither of them in a hurry to end this moment. As November turned to December, Beatrice found her place at the 7 Pines. The work was demanding but rewarding, and she took pride in the meals she helped prepare, the house she helped maintain. Mrs. Chen praised her often, and even the taciturn ranch hands made it clear they appreciated her efforts. But it was Vincent who occupied more and more of her thoughts. They had fallen into a pattern of spending time together, whenever his work allowed. He would seek her out in the evenings, and they would sit by the fire in the main room of the ranch house, talking for hours. Sometimes other people joined them, but often it was just the two of them, sharing stories and dreams and observations about the world. Beatrice learned that Vincent loved to read, that he carried a worn copy of Shakespeare's plays in his saddle bag and could quote long passages from memory. She learned that he had a wry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh at unexpected moments. She learned that he was thoughtful and observant, that he noticed small details and remembered things she told him. Vincent learned that Beatrice was stronger than she looked, that she had a core of steel beneath her gentle exterior. He learned that she was clever and quick-witted, that she could hold her own in any conversation. He learned that she saw beauty in unexpected places, that she found joy in small things despite all she had lost. They were falling in love, though neither said it out loud. It was there in the way Vincent's face lit up when Beatrice entered a room, in the way Beatrice found excuses to linger near him, in the charged silence that sometimes fell between them. The other ranch hands noticed and exchanged knowing looks, but no one commented directly. This was something private, something precious, and it deserved to unfold in its own time. One evening in mid-December, Vincent found Beatrice alone in the kitchen after dinner. She was washing dishes, her sleeves rolled up and her hair escaping from its bun in curling tendrils. He watched her for a moment from the doorway, struck by how right she looked here, how perfectly she fit into this life. "Need some help?" he asked, stepping into the room. Beatrice turned, startled, then smiled when she saw it was him. "I will not turn down an extra pair of hands." Vincent rolled up his own sleeves and picked up a dish towel, falling into an easy rhythm beside her. They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, then Vincent said, "There is a Christmas dance in Kearney next week. The whole town turns out for it. I was wondering if you might want to go with me." Beatrice's hands stilled in the dishwater. She turned to look at him, her brown eyes wide and searching. "Like a real outing, together." "Like a real outing," Vincent confirmed. His heart was beating faster than it should have been, nervous in a way he hadn't felt in years. "If you want to, that is. No pressure." "I would love to," Beatrice said softly, "But Vincent, I do not have anything proper to wear to a dance. My dresses are all worn and patched, Mrs. Chen mentioned she has some fabric put by," Vincent said. "I am sure she would help you make something if you asked. And even if you went in what you are wearing right now, you would still be the prettiest woman there." Beatrice felt heat flood her cheeks at the compliment. "You are just saying that." "I never just say anything," Vincent replied seriously. "I mean it, Beatrice. You are beautiful." The air between them felt charged, heavy with things unsaid. Beatrice found herself swaying slightly toward him, drawn by some force she didn't fully understand. Vincent set down the dish towel, his blue eyes dark with an emotion that made her breath catch. But before either of them could move closer, they heard Mrs. Chen's footsteps in the hallway. Vincent stepped back, clearing his throat, and Beatrice turned quickly back to the dishes. Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, took one look at them, and smiled knowingly. "I thought I heard voices in here," she said. "Vincent, you are supposed to be giving Duke his evening feed, and Beatrice, those dishes will still be there in the morning. You have done enough for today." "Yes, madam," they chorused, sounding absurdly like caught children. Mrs. Chen shooed them both out of the kitchen, still smiling that knowing smile. Vincent caught Beatrice's eye as they parted ways in the hallway, and the look he gave her was full of promise, of things deferred but not forgotten. True to her word, Mrs. Chen helped Beatrice make a new dress for the dance. They worked on it in the evenings, cutting and sewing a lovely creation from deep blue calico that brought out the color in Beatrice's eyes. Mrs. Chen was a skilled seamstress, and under her guidance, the dress took shape beautifully, with a fitted bodice and a full skirt that swirled when Beatrice moved. The night of the dance arrived cold and clear, stars brilliant against the black sky. Vincent brought a wagon around, and he had clearly made an effort for the occasion. He wore clean clothes, his best hat, and boots that had been polished to a shine. When Beatrice came down the stairs in her new dress with her hair pinned up in a style Mrs. Chen had helped her arrange, Vincent stared at her with such open admiration that she felt beautiful for the first time in longer than she could remember. "You look incredible," he said when he found his voice. "So do you," Beatrice replied, and she meant it. Vincent cleaned up very well. The ride into Kearney was magical. Mrs. Chen and her husband came along, as did several of the other ranch hands, all of them piled into wagons and laughing in the cold night air. Someone produced a harmonica, and they sang old songs as they traveled, their voices carrying across the dark prairie. The dance was being held in the town hall, a sturdy building on Kearney's main street. Light and music spilled out into the night, welcoming and warm. Inside, it seemed like half of central Nebraska had turned out. The hall was packed with people, ranchers and farmers and townspeople, all dressed in their best and ready to celebrate. Vincent kept Beatrice close as they navigated through the crowd, his hand steady at the small of her back. He introduced her to what felt like dozens of people, and Beatrice tried to remember names and faces, overwhelmed by the friendliness and curiosity directed at her. Word had spread, apparently, about the woman Vincent Vale had rescued from the prairie, and people were eager to meet her. When the music started, Vincent led her onto the dance floor without hesitation. Beatrice had learned to dance as a girl, but it had been years since she had practiced, and she was nervous. But Vincent was a good leader, confident and sure, and after the first few awkward moments, she found herself relaxing into the rhythm. They danced for hours, taking breaks only when exhaustion demanded it. Vincent was attentive and charming, making her laugh with stories about the other dancers, bringing her punch when she was thirsty, making sure she was having a good time. Other men asked her to dance, and she accepted a few times to be polite, but she always found her way back to Vincent, drawn to him like a compass pointing north. During a slow waltz late in the evening, Vincent pulled her closer than was strictly proper. Beatrice could feel the solid warmth of him, could smell leather and soap and something uniquely him. Her hand rested on his shoulder and she could feel the strength in the muscles beneath her palm. "Having a good time?" Vincent asked, his voice low and intimate. "The best time," Beatrice replied honestly. "Thank you for bringing me." "Thank you for coming with me," Vincent said. He was quiet for a moment, then added, "Beatrice, I need to tell you something." Her heart began to beat faster. "What is it?" Vincent took a breath, and when he spoke, his words were careful but sincere. "I have been alone for a long time. By choice, mostly. I did not think I needed anyone, did not want the complication. But then I found you out there on the prairie and everything changed. These past weeks, getting to know you, spending time with you, they have been the best weeks I can remember. You are smart and funny and beautiful, and when I am with you, everything feels right in a way it never has before. What I am trying to say is that I am falling in love with you, Beatrice." "Actually, I think I have already fallen, completely." Beatrice felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were happy tears. "Vincent," she whispered, "I love you too. I have for weeks now, but I was afraid to say it, afraid it was too soon or that you would not feel the same." Vincent's face broke into a smile so bright it rivaled the lanterns hanging from the ceiling. "Not too soon," he said. "Not for something this right." He spun her gently, and there in the middle of the crowded dance floor, surrounded by music and laughter and the warmth of community, they found their own private moment. When the waltz ended, Vincent led her outside, needing air and space and privacy for what he wanted to say next. The night was cold, but Beatrice barely felt it. Vincent's coat was draped over her shoulders again, familiar and comforting, and his arm was around her waist, holding her close. They walked a little way from the hall, finding a quiet spot where they could see the stars clearly. "I do not have much to offer," Vincent said, turning to face her. "I am just a cowboy who works for wages. I do not own land or have savings put by. But I work hard and I am honest, and I would spend every day of my life trying to make you happy if you would let me. What I am asking, I suppose, is whether you might consider a future with me. I am not asking you to marry me right this second, but I want you to know that is where my heart is heading. I want to build something with you, Beatrice. A life, a home, a family, if that is what you want. I want all of it, as long as it is with you." Beatrice reached up and cupped his face in her hands, feeling the slight scruff of his jaw beneath her palms. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it. I came west looking for a new start, and I found so much more than that. I found you. And I cannot imagine a future that does not have you in it." Vincent kissed her then. A gentle, sweet kiss that held all the promise of the future they were going to build together. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling, giddy with joy and relief and the sheer rightness of it all. They returned to the dance hand in hand, and if anyone noticed the new intimacy between them, no one commented. They danced until the music ended and the lanterns were extinguished, and when they finally climbed back into the wagon for the ride home, Beatrice felt like she was floating. Mrs. Chen, observing from her seat beside her husband, caught Vincent's eye and gave him a satisfied nod. She had known this was coming from the moment Vincent had carried Beatrice into the ranch house that first night. Some things were simply meant to be. The winter passed in a blur of work and stolen moments and growing certainty. Vincent and Beatrice were inseparable whenever his duties allowed, and it became an accepted fact around the ranch that they were a couple. Sterling, the foreman, even made a few gruff comments about young people and romance, but his eyes were kind, and he approved a pay raise for Vincent that everyone understood was meant to help him prepare for marriage. In February, Vincent officially asked Beatrice to marry him. It was not a grand gesture, just the two of them alone by the fire after everyone else had gone to bed, but it was perfect. He gave her a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother, the only thing of value she had left him before she died, and Beatrice accepted it with tears streaming down her face. They were married in April in a simple ceremony at the church in Kearney. Mrs. Chen organized everything, declaring that if the young people were not going to make a proper fuss, someone had to. The whole ranch turned out, along with half the town, and Beatrice walked down the aisle in a new dress that Mrs. Chen had insisted on making, white cotton with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Vincent stood at the altar looking nervous and proud, and so handsome that Beatrice's heart felt too large for her chest. When she reached him and took his hands, he smiled at her with such love that she felt like she might burst from the joy of it. They spoke their vows clearly and firmly, promises to love and honor and cherish, to stand together through whatever life brought their way. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent kissed her with a tenderness that brought appreciative murmurs from the assembled crowd. The celebration afterward was loud and joyous, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the night. Beatrice danced with her new husband, with the ranch hands who had become her friends, with Sterling who was surprisingly light on his feet, with Mr. Chen who was decidedly less so. She laughed until her sides hurt and ate until she was full. And through it all, she kept looking at the gold band on her finger, marveling at how her life had changed. That night, Vincent carried her over the threshold of the small cabin that Sterling had granted them as a wedding gift. It was modest, just 2 rooms and a loft, but it was theirs, and Beatrice loved it immediately. Vincent had furnished it with handmade furniture and supplied it with everything they would need, clearly putting thought and care into every detail. "Welcome home, Mrs. Vale," he said softly, setting her down gently. "Mrs. Vale," Beatrice repeated, testing the name. "I like the sound of that." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, a gentle exploration of each other that left them both breathless and amazed. Afterward, they lay tangled together in their new bed, and Vincent traced idle patterns on Beatrice's shoulder. "Tell me what you are thinking," she murmured. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Vincent replied. "How one decision to ride home a different way changed my entire life. If I had taken the usual route that night, if I had been 10 minutes earlier or later, I might have missed you, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it now." Beatrice turned to look at him, her brown eyes serious. "I think about that too. About how close I came to dying out there on the prairie. And then you appeared, like an answer to a prayer I had not known how to voice. You saved my life that night, Vincent, in every way that matters." "We saved each other," Vincent said firmly. "You gave me a reason to think about a future beyond the next cattle drive. You gave me hope and joy and a sense of purpose I had been missing. We are better together than we could ever be apart." "Yes," Beatrice agreed simply. "Yes, we are." The months that followed were busy and productive. Vincent continued working cattle for the 7 Pines, but now he worked with renewed purpose, saving money and planning for their future. Beatrice continued helping Mrs. Chen, though her hours were reduced now that she had her own household to maintain. She threw herself into making their cabin a real home, sewing curtains, planting a small garden, learning to cook on the temperamental stove that came with the place. Life on the frontier was hard, but it was good. There were challenges, certainly. A harsh spring storm that damaged part of the cabin's roof and required extensive repairs. A bout of illness that swept through the ranch and left everyone weak and exhausted. The constant, grinding work that was required to survive in this unforgiving land. But there were joys too, simple and profound. Morning coffee shared in comfortable silence before the day's work began. Evenings spent reading aloud to each other by lamplight. Rides across the prairie with the wind in their faces and the future spread out before them like a promise. The deep satisfaction of work well done, and the knowledge that they were building something that would last. In October, nearly a year after Vincent had found Beatrice on the frozen prairie, she discovered she was pregnant. She told him over dinner in their cabin, watching nervously as he processed the news. For a moment, Vincent just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his face broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen, and he crossed to her in 2 long strides, sweeping her into his arms. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Beatrice asked, even though she could see that he was. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Vincent replied. He placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach, his expression full of wonder. "We are going to be a family, Beatrice. An actual family." She understood what he meant. Both of them had lost their families of origin, had been alone in the world. But now they were creating something new, building their own family from scratch. It felt momentous and terrifying and absolutely perfect. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Beatrice experienced the usual discomforts. Mrs. Chen, who had raised 4 children of her own, became an invaluable source of advice and support. Vincent hovered protectively, wanting to help with everything, and Beatrice had to gently remind him that she was pregnant, not fragile. Their son was born in June during a gentle summer rain that broke a week-long dry spell. The birth was attended by Mrs. Chen and a midwife from town, and though it was long and difficult, both mother and baby came through it healthy and strong. Vincent, who had been pacing outside the cabin for hours, was finally allowed in to meet his son. Beatrice, exhausted but radiant, held their baby out to him. Vincent took the tiny bundle with trembling hands, staring down at the red, wrinkled face with absolute awe. "He is perfect," Vincent whispered. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas after Beatrice's father, and from the moment he entered the world, he changed everything. Vincent was a devoted father, helping with nighttime feedings, walking the floor when Thomas was fussy, marveling at every tiny milestone. Beatrice had never seen him happier, and watching him with their son made her fall in love with him all over again. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier and more chaotic but deeply fulfilling. Vincent continued working the ranch, but he turned down assignments that would take him away overnight, wanting to be present for his family. Sterling, who had become something of a father figure to Vincent, understood and made accommodations where he could. When Thomas was 6 months old, Vincent came home one evening with news. "Sterling wants to retire," he said, "and he has offered me the position of foreman." Beatrice looked up from where she was feeding Thomas. "That is wonderful, Vincent. You deserve it, but are you sure you want it? It is a lot of responsibility." "I know," Vincent agreed, "but the pay is significantly better and it comes with a larger house. We could actually have space for more children if we wanted them, and I think I am ready for it. Sterling has been teaching me the business side of ranching for months now. I can do this, Beatrice, especially with you beside me." "Then accept it," Beatrice said firmly. "We can handle whatever comes." Vincent accepted the position, and they moved into the foreman's house, a comfortable structure with 3 bedrooms and a real kitchen that made Beatrice sigh with happiness. The added responsibility kept Vincent busy, but he managed it well, earning the respect of the men he now supervised and the confidence of the ranch owner. The years passed in a happy blur. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Emma born 2 years after Thomas, and another son named Henry who arrived 3 years after that. The children thrived, growing strong and healthy under the Nebraska sky, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with age-appropriate chores as they got older. Vincent proved to be an excellent foreman, managing the ranch operations with skill and integrity. Under his leadership, the Seven Pines prospered, expanding its herd and its reputation. He was fair with the men who worked for him, demanding but never cruel, and he inspired a loyalty that made everything run smoothly. Beatrice continued to be involved with the ranch community, helping Mrs. Chen, who was getting older now and moving more slowly. She also began teaching the ranch children their letters and numbers, setting up an informal school in her kitchen that eventually grew to include kids from neighboring ranches as well. She discovered she loved teaching, loved watching young minds engage with new ideas, and the work gave her a sense of purpose beyond her domestic duties. On their 10th anniversary, Vincent took Beatrice on a trip to Omaha, leaving the children in Mrs. Chen's capable care. They stayed in a real hotel with electric lights, a relatively new marvel, and ate in restaurants where other people did the cooking. They walked the city streets hand in hand, marveling at how much the world was changing, at the new inventions and ideas that seemed to appear every day. But they were both glad to return to the ranch, to the open prairie and the big sky and the life they had built together. On their first night home, after the children were asleep, they sat on the porch of their house and looked out at the stars. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not found you that night?" Vincent asked. It was something he occasionally pondered, the sheer luck and timing that had brought them together. "I try not to," Beatrice admitted. "The thought is too frightening.